part of what inspired me to ask you guys to meet today, aside from just being a longtime fan, was that Jon led a workshop, a CJC workshop on metric modulation recently, and used some of your music as examples for the students. And that was, it got me thinking about this kind of tradition of tricky rhythmic stuff in the Bay Area, but going back at least to as long as I've been here, which is early 2000s, and I think for all of you as well, roughly the same amount of time. But one thing though, that even though there is kind of tricky polyrhythms and whatnot in the music, the one thing about the way you guys employ that stuff that I find really cool is that it's not always in your face. It could be pretty subtle, and so there might be some tricky rhythmic stuff going on, but it's not like, look at this cool tricky rhythmic thing. It's and just as much, it's not like it's all like that. Some of the music is very kind of open sounding, textural, so, and that seems to be just as important to the group sound. But I wonder if you guys could kind of help me like recreate or fill in some of the blanks of that, of just rhythmic influences, and kind of, in a way, the history of cool rhythmic stuff in the Bay Area, which you've all been involved with for sure. What I was thinking about was going back to, around the time when I first moved out here, which is early 2001, I think, or 2000 or something like that. But it was one of the teachers out here who was, I think, pretty influential is Pete Magadini, drum teacher. And he has this book that I was studying out of, and a lot of people, even before I moved out here, this polyrhythm book. And then there were drummers out here who had studied or were studying with him, like Chess Smith, and then I think maybe a bit later, somebody who I know that you guys have worked with a lot was Sam Ospavat. And then another kind of, I think, like a big rhythmic influencer was Steve Coleman, who was teaching out here around that same time. And then I think influencing people like Lauren Benedict and Eric Vogler, who also you guys have worked with a bunch. And so I've studied with Steve a little bit, just in like workshops and things, but my sense was like his thing, at least what he would teach in these workshops, was more kind of polymeter type stuff, where it would be this idea where you would clap one rhythm and sing another, and they would kind of overlap periodically, like maybe it would be a 5-beat clapping cycle and a 6-beat vocal chant kind of a thing, and see how those line up. But that's just kind of in those workshop settings. I think another person who made a big impression rhythmically was, again, this is all kind of part of this scene that I put you guys in, was Kim Cass, bass player Kim Cass, who was doing really crazy polyrhythm stuff on solo bass, and also other things like that. So what else would you add to that portrait in rhythm, or influences that were important to you at that time, or now going forward?
I'm just going to start, but I feel like everybody has like their own thing about this. I think one thing that for this group that made it kind of interesting was that we were all sort of interested in polyrhythms and different metric kind of ideas, and playing in odd meters and things, but we were all approaching it kind of from different perspectives, or like from different backgrounds. And you actually may have just spoken about all the backgrounds that we came from in different ways, but like I feel like, and I think that's one of the most interesting thing about time and meter, is that people could be doing the exact same thing but thinking about it in a completely different way, that then influences how you approach thinking about polyrhythm. So like the Pete Magadini approach to me is like very clear, and I checked out those books, and I talking to Sam and stuff about it, Sam Ospavat, and to me that was like, oh, it just made perfect sense to me, and I would try to work on that. But when I would talk to other musicians and be like, oh yeah, this is the way that I'm thinking about it, they'd be like, what? It's like it didn't click. It's like didn't make sense to them. Their brain didn't work that way. But they might be playing the same rhythms and just thinking about them in a completely different way. And that I found that in this group a little bit. Sometimes I'd be like, yo, here's my crazy song with these and weird polyrhythms, and like we'd have to work on it for a while, but once we got it, it would click. Like, maybe Kasey would be like, being like, I don't really know, I don't understand how you're talking about it, but then she'd do it and she'd be like, oh yeah, I see how to do it. It's like this. It was like her way of thinking about it was just different from mine, or whatever, or me thinking about it differently than Jon or something. And to me, that was always really satisfying as a thing of like everyone's striving for this way of hearing music, but just coming to it in very different ways. Which doesn't really answer your question, but it was just something that sort of I felt like I noticed a lot in this group, because all the three of us are interested in polyrhythms and were from the beginning, but I think we came at it from different angles, so it kind of made the music come out differently than if we were all coming at it from the same place, I guess is what I was thinking.
Yeah, I was thinking about the fact that definitely my awareness of a lot of these things was raised by Kim Cass and by Michael when he was showing me some things out of the Magadini book, which I had never really seen spelled out in that particular way, and that made things a lot simpler as far as just counting rhythms and things that I kind of had heard and checked out a little bit, but made it a lot clearer. And then it was interesting when we started to kind of play around with those ideas a little bit. Like sometimes me and Kasey would get together and we would just play, just sort of like maybe take an idea or just freely improvise and kind of see what came out of that and sort of come up with ideas that way. And there were a few times where we were hearing rhythmic things in different places, or I would try an idea and then I would realize that Kasey was hearing it in a different way, or, there were sort of accidental discoveries that way. And it got me thinking personally more about, that's my favorite thing about that kind of rhythmic approach, is that there's sort of a fine line of, when you have control over a lot of these rhythms and you can hear them, and there's exercises where you can train your ear to recognize them. When you mentioned the workshop that I taught, that's one of my ideas as far as, just internalizing some of the sounds of those rhythms, and trying to get them to be more of your native language. But then, in my opinion, the really interesting stuff happens when things are a little bit ambiguous. And so then you're kind of playing with those rhythms, and then they can kind of exist in several different places. And it challenges you as an improviser to hold both possibilities in certain moments. And I found that happening more in the Schimscheimer music, because we were playing some really difficult pieces. There's still one that I don't think it's possible to play it perfectly accurately. It's a piece that Michael wrote called Hedgehog, which is in two different time signatures at the same time, and reminds me a lot of Coleman and Caro or something like that, where it's these very distant rhythmic parts, and we have some ways of anchoring it together, and it's always interesting because it pulls in different directions when we play it. And actually, we were just recently listening to an old version of that. We were talking about playing it for this online performance series that's been going on. And I revisited that one and realized that a lot of the stuff that I like about that type of rhythmic approach was sort of informed by that, by those little moments where certain rhythms that sound very similar can kind of trick your ear, and you have to trust your familiarity with somebody else's rhythmic language to know what the probability is that you're hearing things in the same place. And then, you know, you hear groups like even, you know, the Keith Jarrett Trio, or groups where, you know, they get off and then they just have a very great way of getting back on. And Jack DeJohnette is one of my favorite drummers for that type of approach. Like, he's very flexible in that way. And he sort of thrives in situations where things go off the rails a little bit, which I really like. So I thought about that just in terms of the larger subject of polyrhythms, which have a stigma of being this very, you know, hyper technical way of approaching music.
Mm-hmm.
But then to really, you know, practice hard and really assimilate that language, it opens up a lot of freedom in other ways. And then when you get into looser forms of improvisation, I really like the result of that personally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I literally did not know what a polyrhythm was until playing in the Schimscheimer. I remember sitting there with you, John, and you were like mapping it out for me, like, and that was the first time I even thought about like equally dividing the measure, you know, in 16th notes or triplets or whatever. And I was like, that's what it is. There's like actually like a technical way to approach this. It's not some like thing I'm never going to understand. So I remember that was a major moment. But like I had worked on a lot of the cycling stuff that you talked about, Rob, the rhythmic cycling stuff, from playing in the Holly Martins with Eric and Lauren, because they're super into that kind of stuff. But we never really worked on polyrhythms or that kind of thing. So I was coming from more of that world. So I started learning about polyrhythms because of this band.
Yeah. Well, what I hear, you know, I mean, and to kind of, I don't know, piggyback on what all three of you are saying, that beyond the kind of technical language around rhythm and things like that, there's a kind of a sensibility, which I hear is a certain playfulness in the music, and I think it's, you know, it's kind of in your collective personality as a band, that it's like, yeah, there's this kind of forbidding technical rhythmic language, but it's in this context of almost like a lot of the melodies almost have like a children's song kind of vibe, you know? So like the contrast between those two things is, you know, it's really fascinating, for sure. John, can you fill in the blanks a little bit on you're bringing your electronic setup, or I guess we could call it electroacoustic setup. Was that part of this group in the beginning?
No, that was very much the influence of Michael, because we started out generally more. He was playing some keyboards, but we did a lot of stuff where he was playing piano, I think, at the beginning, if I remember right. So it was I think all acoustic for part of the time. That first DeYoung thing, I think you were playing both keyboards and piano. And that first album, we had some tracks that were just piano only. Then we also did some stuff where there were, I think Michael lent me a Casio, which had some drum sounds on it, and one of the parts, he wanted to hear some synth drums as part of the just as a contrasting texture to the acoustic drums. And so I quickly, there's a trajectory of, you know, the longer you play, the less you want to carry lots and lots of gear to gigs. Usually the trend is to consolidate, and I was thinking, well, I don't really want to carry this keyboard to every gig that we do. That seems less practical, and I could easily recreate those sounds with samples. So I got into doing some different stuff just on iPad, and I was basically just using that to perform some of those parts. So I was triggering synth drum samples. And then through that experience, I stumbled accidentally upon this program called Pure Data. And it's closely related to Max MSP, which is a graphical programming language that a lot of laptop performing artists use. And it's pretty powerful. Just it's a little bit technical to get into, but I just realized that it was kind of in my wheelhouse of just technical enough that I could do it. I'm not somebody who can code, but it's something I could kind of wrap my mind around. And then I got very into that for many years, and I'm still pretty into it. So I started to write my own programs within that have synthesized parts, and then I was using it basically to do some live processing of the band and try to recreate. I think that that second album that we did, Broken Home, there was a bunch of production stuff that Eli Cruz did on that album that we really liked. And like a lot of studio albums where that's happening, we were kind of saying, well, it would be cool to be able to do that live, but a lot of it was just studio performance where there were a lot of just many people adjusting knobs in real time, and not automated. So I think it was mainly through that I got into trying to recreate some of the processing effects live and also do some more synthesis stuff and try to recreate some of the parts. And through that, my own personal setup evolved. So now I have this kind of hybrid electroacoustic setup. And the most recent stuff that we were getting ready to record, we just performed at Temescal Art Center in, I think it was January, when Michael was out on the West Coast. Mm-hmm. And we did a full run through of all that music and got it ready for the studio. And I was trying some new stuff as well, and we were trying to cover more of the synth parts, and just we were experimenting more with I think incorporating some more of that stuff, and just seeing how it might evolve in the future. And I was personally pretty excited about what was happening with it. And then someday it'll be pretty cool when we get to do it in the studio, I think.
Yeah, I found some footage, I think, from that Temescal show on YouTube. So maybe we'll link to some of that. Yeah, and so okay, so really this you're because I've had the pleasure of working with you using some of that setup too, but it was really in this group that started to evolve, like your use of pure data and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
With like particular sounds that, I mean, there's so many sounds, but I think it's even on the. I might be misremembering the order of the records, but I think on that first record, um, were you using this, or this is after that first record?
No, the first record was, I think the first record was actually, it was an amalgam of things. Some of the synth drum parts on that album, I think I actually programmed after the fact, and then we mixed in. Mark Allen Piccolo engineered that album,
Hmm.
and I'm pretty sure there's a song on that album called Milton, which has a bunch of different sections, and there's one where it's just very abstract drum parts. And I think I actually mixed that together with a bunch of. I found a trove of old synth samples, and then I think I just edited that part together. Some of that we were performing live, but I'm pretty sure around that time is also when I think Michael was always the one who was mainly bringing in exciting new effects, and I think it was probably around that time that both Kasey and I got more into using effects as well.
Yeah, it was definitely for me after that first album, The Family Fun Time, and being in the studio and wanting to be able to get the sounds we created in the studio live.
I was going to say too, like to kind of jump back to what John was saying before, and John kind of even mentioned this when he was talking about the polyrhythms. There's a kind of chaos that occurs when polyrhythms go awry, as they do. But like John was saying, if everyone's listening and has a really solid foundation of where they feel like the beat is as a group, it's like you can get back together and there's this kind of the rub of certain rhythms together that are so close that they almost sound the same but they're not quite the same. That's something that I've been really excited about for a long time, and just like want to have that in my music a lot, where it's like maybe like a very slow like 9 against 8. You can't really tell what's going on, but it just sounds like two rhythms that are maybe not. You're like, are they kind of the same? They're all pretty close. And so when we're doing that live or playing together, if we're doing that and some person's like, oh, I'm going to interject this other rhythm in there, and it kind of sends things a little sideways. I feel like John's use of electronics actually kind of complements that, in that it has a certain chaos element to it, especially when it's like when it's the processing side of things, because suddenly like the processing goes bananas and suddenly some sound is happening that then we're responding to, that he didn't necessarily mean for it to happen that specific way, but it then influences the way that we're then improvising, which then influences the processing. So the whole thing becomes even more improvised. It's out of our hands. We're like letting the robots take over a little bit, and I feel like that's another really exciting aspect of the way that John is using electronics. It's not all very precise, specific. It kind of has a little bit of a roll the dice, see what happens,
Hmm.
which I think is also helps with the kind of the playful nature of the music. Is kind of that's tied to that also.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes me think of Michael. That I think other situations that I've heard you play in, or played with you even, of like using some synths to get some kind of like self-oscillating situations happening, and it becomes this thing of interesting rhythms being generated and not necessarily knowing what you're playing or what the machine is playing. And also the that it's, yeah, just it's the we think of like polyrhythms as being this kind of like quantized experience, but yeah, to go beyond that, maybe first you're starting in this like intense kind of workshop environment, running drills and things of that nature, but then to put that aside and just kind of swim in it, that's exciting stuff for sure.
Well, that's something Kim talks a lot about. Actually, if you talk to Kim Cass, he's it's almost like his end goal is to play music that sounds improvised, but is all written extremely complex polyrhythms. And I've heard him do it a little bit, where it's like it almost just sounds like really beautiful free playing, where the band is like kind of together, but you can't really tell why. But it's actually because they're playing these very, very specific polyrhythms. And so for him, it's almost like polyrhythms are a way to freedom. It's like taking him further and further to the sonic, this free sounding place. But he likes the idea that everyone can be doing it together. And I feel like that's a really kind of beautiful, like almost philosophical way to think about polyrhythms.
Yeah, I mean, another way, I mean, that can be this kind of math idea, but I think another idea that it brings to mind is like this was kind of a thing for a while, and it still is, where musicians or instrumentalists are imitating speech patterns and like bird songs and things of that nature, or just like the sounds of machines and things. And maybe it's already starting out not as a quantized rhythm, but it is a very particular rhythm, and then you put that on your horn or on your piano or something like that. That's like a YouTube thing, It's a whole school there. So our good friend Ben Goldberg was not able to join us today, but he is featured prominently on the last album, Broken Home. Can you talk at all about how Mr. Goldberg got involved with the group?
We've all played with Ben a lot over the years in various configurations, so it just seemed natural. Like, of course we would have Ben Goldberg play with us. That's what my recollection is.
I
Who would
think
be the
also
perfect person?
He really loved the band. He was one of our biggest fans. Like, we would play and he was just like, "Oh, this is my favorite music," and it would kind of just seem like, well, Ben's really loving this music. We should just have Ben play with us because it'll make the music better, and he'll be happy because he's playing music that he likes. It was just a perfect combination. But it's funny because we also, is the only other person that we've played with Nate Brenner, or has there been another collaborative partner?
That's all I can remember.
Yeah, just the two of them.
And actually, Nate was one of the original bass players we played with back before this band even really was what it is now. Full circle.
Wasn't the band called like the We Three Trio? Or did you had like a name? It was like a
The
band.
Royal We Three Trio.
The
yeah.
Royal We Three, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, Nate was someone. Sorry, John. But him and Ben were both people that we felt like would be really like interesting collaborators with our music in totally different ways. But they both brought like their own. They both have kind of strong aesthetics and kind of their own musical languages in a way that I felt like they brought to our music. And both times I felt it was like a really nice complement to what we were doing.
Also, Ben playing contrabass was a nice texture to have in the band because we don't have a bass player.
Mm-hmm.
I can personally say that for me the moment, like I think it might have been the Ben Goldberg School was the first time that I heard Kasey and Ben play together in the same room at the same time. And while I knew I would, even without having heard it, I knew I would love that sound. Just like that, just those two horns playing together. That was kind of like a no-brainer for me. It's just like so good, the interplay, and they just speak exactly the same good language. So I think for me, I think I actually played with Ben later than either of the other two of you. myself, and since then have done more stuff with him just as a duo, like with the electroacoustic project. So just what I had heard at the time, I was definitely excited about that, just because of the thing you mentioned before, like just that melodic mastery that Kasey is always, I think that's I think Kasey is really just it's all about Kasey and our band in terms of the thing that people identify with, that real melodicism and that sound, what you described before, like that kind of thing that somehow validates the nerdy rhythmic approach and keeps it from devolving into hyper technical exercise. I think it's all about Kasey in that regard. So, and then Ben was just a perfect addition in that sense as well, because he's a master melodic mind. He really fits in perfectly in that way. And then also with the contrabass clarinet, it was like this multi-dimensional thing that he brought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you guys have a thing. This is purely speculative, but I think you guys have a thing for the clarinet also. Michael Coleman.
Michael.
We're gonna
It was
get
all
on
because,
record.
yeah, I mean, I've the thing is that I actually didn't. I started trying to play the clarinet. I was like teaching myself the clarinet before I met Ben. I've always just like been like the clarinet is the best instrument. That's sort of been my go-to of all. I'm just like if I was worthy, I would be a clarinet player, but instead I have to play these silly pianos and keyboards and things. But so I was like learning clarinet before I met Ben, and I actually even took a lesson from Corey Wright, which was very helpful. He was like, "Your mouthpiece is terrible, and you should get a better mouthpiece." But but when I met Ben and I started playing with him, I was like, "Oh, this is like." For me, it was like we hit it off right away, both because I'm a big fan of clarinet, but I love Ben's playing, and we had a real simpatico kind of vibe together of playing. And then after playing with him, I was like, I'm going to get even more clarinets in my life, and I'm going to have bands that are only clarinets,
Right.
as many clarinets as possible. So that's you might be onto something.
And this is definitely a stretch, but I think sometimes Casey's saxophone sounds like a clarinet. I'm just gonna, I don't know, not even sure what that means, but
I can honestly say that's the first time anyone's ever said that to me.
and sometimes John's drums sound like a clarinet. No, but I sometimes like Kasey. I don't know if this is one of those things about when you talk about sound for a horn player, it can be like, hard to pin down like influences and things like that. But the sometimes when I hear you play kind of softly in the upper register, it has a clarinetish, like a soft clarinetish. Like sometimes where like a trumpet player says, "I want to sound like a French horn," sometimes the sax was like going for this like soft clarinet vibe, as opposed to a more strident saxophone-ish tone.
I wonder if that's from...
Put you in that clarinet box. You can...
No. But I do think playing, because I was like primarily a tenor player for years and years, I think playing tenor for that long definitely made my alto sound, whether I like it or not, what it is, so I think that has a lot to do with that upper register thing that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. You guys are hard to pin down, and I don't think we got any closer to pinning you down today, but I think we did do some exploration, which I enjoy. So.
I'm just really bummed that we didn't get to record this new record, because I think there was going to be some real nice new music on there. Just from that one gig we played, it was very inspiring. I feel like one thing, kind of going back to the very original topic that we talked about, but like becoming a band, the origin of a band, how a band starts, the way that a band changes over time, and often in bands that I've been in that have that are together for a long time, which is not that many because bands don't always last, but the few that I have been, from the first point, maybe thinking about the first thing you recorded or whatever, the first thing you did, to where you are at this point in time, watching that development and seeing how a band morphs together, like the people in the band, they're bringing stuff to the band that is like the band, not just like, oh, I have this song, maybe we could play my song, and then you try to fit that into what the band is, but like how people are writing for a band and imagining the future of what that music's going to sound like. To me, was super exciting when we got together this last time. We all brought music in, and it just kind of, it was still very much our own music. Like you could hear each of our own personalities in it, but it felt like we were like, oh, now we understand how to make our sounds work together even better. And we rehearsed for a couple of days and then played that music, and I was like, wow, we actually did it. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it was we like really got to the place that I think we were starting to aim for or something. You know, I flew out from New York with a bunch of music, and Kasey had music and Jon had music, and we just got together and workshopped it together. But because we had in our minds how we want the Schimscheimer family, what we want it to be, like we're collectively creating the Schimscheimer family. Whereas from at the beginning, it was more like, here's my song, how do we fit these together? Do they fit together? Should I play a synthesizer, you know, or whatever. Now it's like we know the aesthetic, the sound that we're sort of seeking. So it's easier to kind of come together and just be like, here's this music, and it kind of had its own life, as opposed to us having to breathe life into it or something.
Dare I ask you to put that aesthetic into words?
Or you guys want to take a stab?
Thing?
Kasey.
I'm speechless. I don't know if this is related or not to this particular topic, but in terms of our band sound and it developing and changing over time, it's like been informed by various things. And one of the things that, interestingly, I feel like has kind of made or given us a specific sound I don't know that we would have otherwise is this like kind of bizarre narrative that we created, that we have all these distant relatives, you know, like uncles, and like Ben, for instance, we refer to him as Uncle Ben, and like, you know, cousins and our fake Schimscheimer mother that we've written these like tributes for, these fake people, which I think that kind of idea has like an interesting effect on the sound of the music. I don't know if that's related to what you were saying, Michael.
I think it's a part of the same idea of that, like we've created an aesthetic, we've created a mythology almost. Like the Schimscheimer family at first was a joke. We're like, ha, wouldn't it be funny? We all kind of look the same. What if we called ourselves a family band? But it became, we were like, no, now we are a family band, and here's our relatives, and here's the family, the music that is our family music. You know, it's like, instead of just being like my music or Jon's music or Kasey's music, it became like, we're all writing for the family in a way. And somehow that, you know, and I guess in terms of like an aesthetic, it's like I think that this is sort of an aside, but related. Like when I came out there, I was like, oh, I want this album to have a unified sound. That was like important for me. Like in general, I feel that way more and more when I'm making a record. I want the record to be like, you put the record on and the record is a thing. The sound of the record is a thing, like from the sonic standpoint, from some aesthetic, emotional standpoint, almost like, you know, like you put on one of your favorite records and it just, the whole record hits you in a way, like, and you could turn to any song and it could be some, you know, something that you know, like just for an example, like Kind of Blue, obviously, it's like there's an aesthetic throughout the whole record, even though they play like more traditional kind of blues versus this kind of modal thing, there's still this kind of general aesthetic, and it's because of the musicians and the way it was recorded and whatever their ideas were. And that's how I was thinking for this record. Wouldn't it be oh, nice one, Kasey. A double hat.
Well,
anyway,
to mention as an aside that, you know, Michael, you've been very involved in making records for a number of years now, as an engineer, right? And as kind of on the production side of things.
Yeah, and I think that for me that was part of why I've been having this feeling of like when I make a record now, my own music, I want it to be like, this is the sound of it. So like I've kind of come more into this idea of like sound is as important as the music, which I used to be dismissive of, especially when I was more like a straight ahead kind of jazz musician. I was kind of like, I didn't, and I still see this as an engineer when I'm working with more sort of straight ahead people. They don't think about the production as much. It's not, I'm not blaming them. It's just a different thing. It's like, they're just like, I just want the piano to sound like a piano. And I'm like, okay, sure. Versus like, how do I make this record have a sonic place, a world, right? That's to me what I'm thinking of. And for this record with the Schimscheimers, I was like, I want to make this have a world. So I was a little nervous since we had played together in years, it seemed like, and we were kind of at different places. And I was like, how is this going to work? And when we got together, it just kind of fell into place because I think we'd all been thinking about the same things and thinking of writing for the instruments, in that sort of coming back to like a Duke Ellington thing, like writing for the people in the band, writing for the sounds of those instruments. And I think I was like, I had in mind, how does Kasey sound? What's a melody that Kasey's going to sound amazing playing? Like, what can Jon do with the electronics that another drummer might not do because they're just playing a drum set or something? So, and I think we all kind of were thinking that way. And so, to me, like if I had to put a word on the aesthetic, it's like kind of a dreamy, like a dream, like we're aiming for some sort of psychedelic nature and dreamy psychedelic thing, but with very, like with beautiful melodies that are like, so it's like kind of a mixture of this like melodic, poignant thing with this like kind of like somewhat mysterious. You can't quite, like you were saying before, Rob, like you don't even notice there's some weird polyrhythm happening, but something is happening that's making the music shift in a funny way. So there's like a mystery to it, almost like an underlying question mark, just or something.
Yeah, I think I'll also add just that we have, I think the trust has evolved to the point where we all kind of know that we can bring in anything. I've brought in just kind of random sketches before, and it's turned into something completely different because just knowing that process can, you know, if Kasey or Michael hear anything in particular, I have a lot of trust that it's going to end up in a good place, and there's not worry about, you know, stepping on anybody's toes. I think we're on the same page that we can kind of we know that we don't have to perfectly define that aesthetic to know that it's going to end up somewhere that we're all pretty happy with. So, so that definitely made that process of, you know, we're all busy and we're all running around and we live on different ends of the continent, and you know, we'll go for months sometimes and just not talk and like making plans for this album, but the knowledge that we can kind of just come together and then work and then do that, and our ears will inform where the music needs to go, I think it's a nice feeling, just because then we don't, it takes the pressure off, like you guys were saying about feeling like you need to bring in a piece that's just a generic piece that works on its own without thinking about who you're writing for. And, you know, knowing each other as well as we do, also it's also nice for writing music. For me, it's a lot easier to write music for this group than many other different configurations, because I just know what's going to work and what people are going to respond well to. So.
Oh man, well, I'll just say that I am looking forward to whenever it is possible for you guys to record that music. I'm looking forward to hearing it. That's for sure. Yeah. Anything else you guys want to add before we wrap up today?
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah. It was fun.
Cool. All right. Well, let's leave it there. I appreciate it very much. And I wish you guys all well, and hope to see you in person before too much longer. Yeah. Talk to you guys later. Thank you.
Take care.
Rob.
Good to see you guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
you.